What's up guys, how the heck are you doing? Welcome to 5 Things You Should Know. So 5 Things You Should Know is a brand new series on this channel, and it is a video series where I give you guys 5 things you should know in the world of filmmaking, photography, and content creation. And this format hopefully will be a 5-minute or less video so you guys can get in, get the information you need, and get out and get back to shooting and creating content as soon as possible. Also, these videos will take place on Fridays, so they will be dubbed 5 Things You Should Know Fridays going forward. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode of 5 Things You Should Know. Alright guys, so this episode of 5 Things You Should Know is all about 5 things a beginner photographer should know when starting out. So Ansel Adams, the famous photographer, was quoted with saying that a good photograph is knowing where to stand. What if I was to tell you it is actually as simple as that sounds, right? Getting a good photograph is actually just knowing where to stand, among a few other things, but hear me out. We're going to talk about that one a little bit further in the video here, but getting good photos is actually really easy once you learn these 5 tips that I had many years of frustration and many hundreds upon hundreds and thousands of dollars wasted trying to figure out. But having somebody actually tell you these are the things that truly work, not only will your photography change for the better overnight, you will also become a more confident photographer. So let's get into these and let's talk about why each one of these tips is important. So tip number 1, guys, is all about gear. You hear it all the time on YouTube and Instagram and stuff that gear doesn't matter. And that is true to an extent, right? I will say though that gear only matters in certain cases if you have to have a specific camera for a specific job, right? But other than that, like, the difference between an expensive camera and a cheap camera is the ease of use. So the only way you can get a better photograph, or the only way you can get a certain photograph with a certain camera type, is the more expensive camera just makes it easier for you to get said photo. It is just a lot harder to get it with a cheaper camera, and that is only because the difference in cost comes down to the settings that are built into the more expensive camera. Any camera that's come out in the last decade, really decade and a half, is very, very capable of getting professional looking photographs. I have seen professionals shoot with consumer grade, very cheap cameras and get professional looking results. And on the flip side of that, I have seen total chuds shoot with professional looking cameras and get absolutely trashed. So a good camera and a good lens doesn't make the photo. You, the photographer, makes the photo. And I absolutely hate when people say, oh, that's a good picture. What kind of camera do you have? What matters is my knowledge and my experience as the photographer. So don't ever let anybody chalk up your good photos to the type of camera you're shooting on, because you can shoot with anything. As long as you know what you're doing, you can get great results. So as you're starting out, you need to worry about your knowledge and you need to worry about your skills. Don't worry about the gear, because it's very easy to do, and I've been there. That's why I'm telling you not to waste money, and it's very easy to get caught up in gear envy and gear lust, because you see all of these photographers, content creators with the best gear and sponsorships and that sort of thing. Don't fall victim to that trap. So this takes us to tip number 2, and tip number 2 is composition. So you want to pay attention to the subject you are shooting and what you want the subject to be in your shot. Then you want to pay attention to how the subject is placed in the frame of your shot and how it interacts with all of the other elements in the frame. For example, if you look at this video here, you can see how I am positioned. I am center positioned in this frame here, and that is my composition. I could be positioned over here and that would give you a different emotion. I can be positioned over here and that would give you a different emotion. The same with if I'm faced this direction, or if I'm way down here and I have too much headroom, right? So you really want to pay attention to how you're positioning your subject in the frame. So a couple tips when it comes to composition, guys, is balance and symmetry. So you see these 2 lights right here. I try, sometimes it's a little bit harder in video, I try to keep my head directly in the middle of these 2 lights, because symmetry and balance, if my photos are unsymmetrical or unbalanced, a lot of times it drives me absolutely crazy. So pay attention to these sort of things as you're shooting. A good composition is actually very subjective, just like art. So once you learn the compositional rules, it's 100% okay to break them. But a bad composition is very easy to see, and it's very easy to see somebody that is unsure of what they're doing or doesn't know what they're doing when you see a bad composition. So use the rule of thirds to help guide you through this. I have a video here all about the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is just a grid that you can access in your camera settings, whether it's on your smartphone or any modern day camera, that helps put a grid over the top of your viewfinder and lets you give you this rule of thumb of where you should position subjects in your photo. It is just sort of like a little cheat sheet, and it's not the end all be all, but it definitely helps out when you're starting. One more easy tip, guys, is as you're shooting people, make sure you're not cutting off their body parts. So for example, again, using this as a photograph, if I was to be like this and you couldn't see the top of my head, that would really be awkward unless I was doing, for example, like a close-up type of shot. But if it's sort of a medium shot like this, but yet my head was up like this, you know, that just looks bad. So you have to pay attention to just making sure you're not cutting out any important features or any important elements that should be included in your shot. So that brings us to tip number 3, guys, and that is learn your camera settings. So this should be a given, but in the age of smartphones and smartphone photography, many people expect to pick up a traditional camera and expect it to behave like a smartphone. And it can, but that truly limits your camera's possibilities and its capabilities. Whichever camera you are planning to shoot with, you need to become proficient with it. And part of becoming proficient with your camera is learning its settings. To learn its capabilities, you need to learn its limitations as well. Again, almost every camera made in the last decade or two is capable of producing professional looking results. You just have to know how to use it. And you have to learn the settings. Taking your camera out of auto mode is one of the best things you can do. Now, starting out when you first get a camera, you very first start photography, maybe shooting in auto mode just to get yourself acquainted with what the camera's doing is a good idea. But the sooner you take the training wheels off is what auto mode is. As soon as you take those training wheels off, you'll really be able to fly, right? So paying attention to your different settings, whether it's aperture priority or whether it is full manual mode, and seeing how your settings in your camera rely on one another to do certain things. So learning ISO, aperture, and shutter speed is critical for you learning the settings of your camera. It is also very important for you to learn these 3 and how they relate to one another in order to get great photos. So take time, you don't have to read the manual. There are plenty of YouTube videos. I have one here all about settings for the Sony mirrorless cameras, but the best way to do it is just go out and shoot and pay attention to what your camera is doing. So that brings us to tip number 4, guys, and number 4 is the most exciting in my opinion, and it's all about chasing the light. Because as a cinematographer first and a photographer second, I absolutely live for good light. So a lot of times I'm always just searching for that perfect light. So this is why you hear photographers all the time talking about golden hour. If you don't know what golden hour is, it is the hour after sunrise and it is the hour before sunset. And photographers love shooting on these 2 hours because it is a very dramatic type of day. You get long shadows, the sun is low in the sky, so it's pretty soft, and it's just very warm looking light, and it always yields good photos if you know how to use your camera. So, but that's not the only time you could shoot. You could shoot in low light with ambient lighting. You could shoot at high noon if you know how to adjust your camera settings, or you could shoot on overcast days. You could shoot in the rain, you could shoot in the snow. You just have to know how to find and chase that light, because obviously the way your camera operates is it operates via light. You have to have light in order for your camera to see. But chasing the light, that is a very fun thing to do, because as you become a photographer, you look at light completely different. Your eyes will get trained to look at not only lighting temperature, like the Kelvin scale, but the quality of light in situations. For example, like if you're in a studio environment, you'll see the quality of light there, and then you go into an office building and you'll see the dingy lighting there. So it is really crazy how you will start seeing light differently than your pre-photography life or somebody that is not a photographer. So learning the difference between good light and bad light is critical. Learning when people use artificial light to get certain photos, like whether they're using soft boxes like I have here, or they're using big flashes, right? They're using strobes in a studio environment to get certain types of light. There is so much you can do, and you need to learn how photographers are getting these looks so you don't drive yourself crazy thinking that they're shooting with all natural light, which, again, you can get great looking photos with natural light. You just have to know what look is what and when to use which, right? So the quicker you learn the difference between harsh light and soft light, good light and bad light, the easier your job as a photographer will be. And it will also help you not only not compare yourself to certain photographers and the looks that they're getting, but it will also just save you tons of frustration and help you make intentional buying choices when you decide to go one way or another in your photography career. Tip number 5, guys, is sort of the mantra of this channel. It is just go shoot. And what just go shoot means, guys, is just get your camera, go out there and shoot a lot. You need to just go out and you need to learn your camera settings so you could kind of see how all of these tips go together. But Malcolm Gladwell famously said that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to master something, and that is the same with photography. You are going to take a lot more bad photos than you will ever take great photos. So it's going to be extremely frustrating while you're taking those bad photos, but it's also exciting. I was never more excited in photography than the first 2 years when I started out. I absolutely love that journey of not knowing what to do and then learning a new skill and applying that to my next shoot or my next shot, and then sort of learning and building that foundational knowledge till I would start getting great photos. The key here, guys, is not to overthink it. It's just to grab your camera, go out and shoot, and pay attention to what your camera is doing, and pay attention to the settings you're adjusting as you're getting these shots. So those are 5 tips, guys, and I also have a few additional tips here. And one of the main ones that I've realized that have helped me is if you think you got a good shot after you followed all these other tips and you think you nailed a shot, shoot that shot from 3 different angles, right? So sometimes you think that the composition that you got is correct. Keep that subject in frame and try shooting it from this angle, maybe shoot it up close, maybe squat down, or shoot it from up above. Always try 3 different angles, because not only will, when you get back in the edit, on a big screen, on your computer, your iPad, or whatever, your pictures are gonna look different. So always try 3 different shots, and you may get 3 bangers and just put those all in a carousel on Instagram, right? So you may get 3 really good shots, or you may only get 1, and the shot that you thought was good, you may actually prefer one of the other angles instead. So shoot from 3 different angles, even though you think you got the shot. Also, I would say don't worry about developing a style in the beginning. Your style will come. Don't try to copycat what somebody else is doing. I've talked about in one of my videos, Austin Kleon's book, that says still like an artist. So just look at all of your inspiration, that's great. But all your inspiration is eventually going to become your style. So you will develop a style the more you shoot. Don't try to copycat somebody else, and don't, worry too much about trying to have a look in the beginning. And here's something that I want you to remember. It's sort of a photographer saying that photography is 70% of what's in the photo, 20% how you take the photo, and 10% the edit. And that leads me to my next additional tip, guys, is learn Lightroom. Learn your editing software of choice. Mine is Lightroom, but learn your editing software of choice, because in order to be on an even playing field with all the other photographers out there, you need to learn how to edit your photos, because again, you could take a terrible photo and edit it into a great photo. I've done it many times. So I hope you guys enjoyed these 5 tips as well as all these additional tips. Link to any of these other videos to learn more about photography, and let me know if you like these 5 things you should know type of video formats. We're going to be doing these on Fridays, like I said, over different topics, but I really enjoyed making this. And if you guys haven't subbed to the channel, go ahead and sub. Let me know down in the comments if you guys have any additional tips for beginning photographers. And as always, guys, remember, just go shoot, and I'll catch you on the next one.